In this video, we're going to talk about working with the DOM, specifically how to access DOM nodes, how to change attributes of those nodes, how to add nodes dynamically, and more. So in the past, I've created like 3 or 4 lines of code, and then we would look at what those lines did. And I wanted to change my tactic for this particular example to show you something a little bit more interesting, a little more compelling. So I've already created a DOM nodes HTML, DOM nodes CSS, and DOM nodes JS. And you can see here that I basically created just a little playground. It does nothing of practical value. It's completely contrived, but it will show you how we can manipulate various DOM nodes and their attributes, and you might find some of the practical side of this, how did I accomplish that, useful as you pick apart this program, and we'll walk through it here in just a moment. But again, this does nothing useful. It has a click me button, a series of div tags, each with a color and the name of the color itself, and then a number beneath that. And I'm just going to click the click me 2 or 3 times. All right, you can see that several things are happening all at once. First of all, we are changing, every time the click me button is clicked, we are changing the selected color div. You can see the selections change because there's this thick bottom border applied to that particular div. Furthermore, that color is applied to this number, and that number seems to be growing each time we click the click me button. So here we're going to click it, we go to pumpkin. What happens when we get to the end of our list of colors and I click the click me button one more time? We start back over at the beginning of the list, and so I can just continue to click this. The number is growing. I'm using relative ems, rems in CSS. Using it, the number of times I've clicked it, that's the number of rems that I'm applying to this font. And so you can see that things are changing. They're very dynamic, and I just wanted to kind of, it's a large enough application to be interesting, small enough that I think you can pick it apart and kind of understand what's going on. And that's really the intent here. So let's take a look at the source code itself. And we'll start with the HTML. There's really not much interesting here. I'm pulling a font from the Google Fonts, and then I'm also applying a style sheet. The style sheet itself, not a lot interesting in it, and I don't want to take too much time. It's just making everything look a little bit nicer than our previous examples. Here we're looking at the result container, and that seems to be where we have basically the white area with everything else inside of it, this button, this row of divs, and the number. And so you can see that each of these have IDs applied to them. The click me is my button. The color div will contain a series of child divs, and I'll talk about that more in just a moment. And then the result div is where we add the current number of clicks that continues to grow and grow. Here we have our script reference to domnodes.js. That's where all the magic happens. First of all, you can see that I've created an IFI here. I can roll it up using the little plus and minus right next to that line of code in line 1. You can see that I've created a couple of functions, one called increment counter, one called update UI, and then one called handle click. You can see that I've initialized a variable called counter to the value of 0. Here I'm getting a reference in line 74 to the button, and then I'm wiring it up like we learned about in the previous video to every time that the click event is raised for my button, I want to add an event listener. Here we have a function expression that will execute both the increment counter method that we looked at the very top, and then the update UI method that we looked at. It was right below it, and we'll go in. This is where a lot of the magic happens, so we'll look at that in more detail in just a moment. Then here you can see in line number 80, I execute update UI in order as the page loads, because again, as a immediately invoked function expression, I want this to happen as soon as this file is loaded into our HTML by the web browser. Okay, so let's go here to the top And we can see increment counter is very simple. It just takes whatever the current value counter is and increments it by 1. All right. Now, update UI is where a lot of the magic happens. First of all, we start off with an array of color objects. Each color object has a name. This is the name that you saw printed kind of in the top middle part of each of the div tags, as well as the color value itself. And I just grabbed these from a website that has colors. I think you see the colors. I'll give you the site in domnodes.css. All right, the first thing we want to do is grab the result div. This is where we're going a reference to that element, and we use the ID result div to get an access to it so that we can programmatically work with it. This is the div that will contain the current number of clicks. Not only will we increment the display the incremented click number, but then we will also change its size and its color attributes as well. All right. Next up, what we want to do is then set the inner text attribute or property of the result object. So this result div, we're going to set a property called inner text. That's how we're able to put 1, 2, 3, 4 inside of that div tag here at the very bottom of our white section of our web page. Okay. And then, so you can see this is one way that we are getting a reference to a DOM node or a DOM element and then changing the attribute. We're changing the text. Whatever it was, we're overriding it with the current value of counter. All right. Then what we do is additionally access the style of that div. So here we're going to the style object of the result element. And then the style object has a series, and I can hit the period on the keyboard to look at the IntelliSense. All of these are attributes or properties of the style object for our div tag. And we can change all of these attributes if we want. Most of them are visual in nature. And here I just want to change the size of the font, taking the current value of the counter and appending EM to make it larger each time, that EM being a unit of measure in CSS. All right, so that's how we're making changing the number of times that the button has been clicked in that div tag, and then also changing its size every time we click it. Okay, so next up, what we want to do is determine what the current color is in our array of colors. So here's what we do. We take the current value of counter and we use the modulo or modulus operator, which will give us the remainder. So if this has been clicked 6 times and there are 6 elements inside of our array of colors that we define as a const here at the top, then the modulo would be 0. There would be 0 remainder, so we would access the first element of that array, and that would be this alizarin. It's that coral color, all right? And so we would use that. So that's how I'm using and being able to kind of select each of the items. I take the current counter. So if it was 2 and there were 6, then that would give me a remainder of what? Of 4. So it would be the we would grab the 4th element from our colors array and grab the value property of that particular object and set that as the result style object's color attribute. All right. Moving on now, what we want to do is clear out all the existing child color divs. So I basically tear down and recreate this list of colors by basically removing everything first of all from the previous call to update UI, and then I begin to re-implement it as I'm looping through each of the color objects to create a new div. If it's the currently selected one, then I want to apply not only the bottom border, but then also use that color here. I guess I already did that part, but at any rate, this is why I'm setting the inner HTML to an empty string of the color div, because I'm emptying out everything inside of the current div. But now I'm going to loop through each of the colors, and here I'm basically dynamically creating new div tags. So I create a new div tag, and then I create a text node with the name of the color for, whether it's the first object, the second object, the third object. I'm grabbing that name and creating a text node. I append that text node as a child to the div tag that I just created. I style it up, and then at the very bottom here, you're going to see I actually append that node that I've been styling up to the larger outermost color div. So I do that 6 times. And if it is the currently selected item, then I'm going to change the styling of that particular node by adding a class, the selected class, and that's what's going to add that bottom border. In fact, here, I wonder if I could just go to here and find selected. So there we go. It is just adding a bottom border of 5 pixels with no padding. All right. And so that's pretty much it. Now you'll see that throughout I'm accessing the style object or attribute of the given div tag, setting its width, its height, and other properties like float, padding left, padding top. And I could have just created a CSS style and then added it using the same technique that I've used here. But I chose just to demonstrate that we can get at all those style attributes. In addition to the style object, there are other things that we're able to do to it, like append a child to it. So we have a div tag and we want to append something to it. We have a div tag and we want to append it as a child to that div tag, which is already a child to a div tag, child to the body, right? So hopefully this will help you to see how this whole process works, and that we can basically get at any DOM node. We can modify it. We can add new child nodes to it, creating them essentially out of thin air. And we could even do more, like move nodes around if we really wanted to, and so on. Obviously, this example didn't call for that. But essentially, once we get a handle to an element, then we can do anything we want with it that we can conceive of. So there are so many options that it didn't really make sense to kind of go through them in a laundry list. Basically, this is a matter of imagining what it is you want to accomplish, getting a reference to the element that you need to start with, determining, do I need to create a new element and append it on, or do I need to remove elements that are currently child of the existing node? Which attributes of that node do I want to change, and so on, until you kind of construct. I mean, it took me several minutes to build this example, and it started really simply. It started by, can I just increment the current number of clicks? All right, I got that working. Now let's move on to the next thing. Can I create a bunch of colors and have them applied to the number? Can I create a bunch of divs and apply those colors to the div? And so you just keep working at it little by little until you've tackled essentially the whole application. And that's how I built this. All right, so hopefully that was helpful as kind of a larger example that we're able to dissect and understand better how to accomplish something that we conceive of by working with nodes inside of the DOM. All right, so let's continue on. I guess we're pretty much done, so let's wrap it up in the next video. See you there. Thanks.